Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of Frederik VII. He was a 19th century Danish king who was completely torn, stuck between the destiny of his entire nation and the passions of his own heart. Let's get right into it.
So, picture this. The year is 1848. The whole kingdom is just simmering with tension. You've got halls just like this one, filled with politicians and nobles arguing, while right outside the people of Denmark are demanding a revolution. The age of kings having absolute power was coming to an end, whether the guys in charge were ready for it or not. And that really brings us to the core question here. Because right in the middle of all this political chaos, all this military drama, was one man, King Frederik. His story makes you ask, what really happens when the fate of a whole country is in the hands of a leader who's fighting a war on two fronts, one for his kingdom and another one for his own soul?
Okay, so let's really set the stage. First up, we're looking at a kingdom that is right on the edge. The nation was facing two massive crises at the exact same time, a huge push for democracy from inside the country and the very real threat of war from the outside.
You have to remember, 1848 was known as the Spring of Nations. Revolutions were just popping up all over Europe. So this wasn't just some Danish problem, it was like a continental wildfire. And the Danish people, totally inspired by what was happening, they took to the streets. They wanted an end to the king's absolute power. They were demanding a constitution, the Grundtvig, that would finally give them a real say in their own government. The pressure on Frederik was just immense.
And this is where we get to the real heart of the story, the king's two battles. Because while Frederik was trying to handle this massive public crisis, he was also being completely consumed by a private struggle that was just as intense. His public battle was huge. If he signed that constitution, he would be voluntarily giving up the absolute power his family had held for centuries. Just think about that. He was facing this fierce opposition from conservatives in his own government who saw it as a total disaster. He had to walk through this political minefield to bring Denmark into a new democratic age.
But at the very same time, he was fighting this intensely private battle. While his kingdom was literally in upheaval, his entire personal world revolved around this all-consuming, really complicated love for a woman named Lise. She was the center of his universe and the source of both incredible joy and, well, a whole lot of turmoil. And as if a revolution wasn't enough to deal with, now we get to Denmark at war. On top of all the internal political drama, a military conflict just erupted. And it was a conflict that would end up defining Frederik's reign and shaping modern Denmark forever.
The First Schleswig War broke out over these two territories, Schleswig and Holstein. They were on the border, with a mix of Danish and German people, and it turned into a brutal fight over land, language, and national identity. This wasn't just some political argument. It was a war with a devastating human cost, as you can see. And Frederik, as king, was the commander-in-chief of it all.
So this war just raged for 3 brutal years. It kicks off in 1848, the same year the revolution starts. Then, by 1849, as these huge battles were testing the entire nation's will to survive, Frederik's personal world was also starting to completely fall apart. The fighting didn't stop until 1851, with an uneasy truce. That's 3 years of public bloodshed running side by side with his private agony.
And that brings us from the battlefield back to a much quieter, much more intimate struggle. This was the battle Frederik fought behind closed doors, totally hidden from the eyes of his government and his generals.
Now, what's just absolutely heartbreaking is that while Denmark was fighting for its very survival, the woman Frederik loved more than anything was losing her own battle. Lise's health was just collapsing. The source material says she was completely consumed by fear and regret, terrified of what was coming and feeling like she had just wasted her life.
And as he watched her fading away, he told a doctor something so simple, so raw, and so devastating. He said, "It's the lungs. Now they don't want to anymore." There's no royal protocol in those words, is there? That's just the sound of a man watching the love of his life die.
So how do all these pieces come together? Well, our final section looks at the man and his legacy, a legacy that was forged in these twin fires of public war and private grief.
And here's the incredible thing. Out of all this chaos, a new modern Denmark was actually born. The war, as bloody as it was, ended up unifying the nation. The constitution he signed laid the groundwork for one of the most stable democracies in Europe. By any public measurement, his reign was a massive success.
And this slide just sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? On one side, you have the public king. He's the celebrated giver of the Constitution, the leader who guided his country through a brutal war and secured its future. But then, on the other side, you have the private man, a passionate, troubled soul whose life was defined by a single great love and absolutely haunted by an unbearable personal loss.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. When we look back at people like Frederik VII, you just have to wonder, is history really shaped by the grand political plans and all the treaties we read about in textbooks? Or is it just as powerfully shaped by the hidden, private struggles of the people who just happen to be wearing the crown?